I had spent most of my life feeling like I was trapped in a cage I had built for myself. At first, I convinced myself that I had control. This was what I wanted, what I needed. But after everything that happened with Claire, I knew I was fooling myself. It wasn't the life I chose. It was the life I was forced to accept. When I decided to leave, it was more about running from her than finding myself. I didn't even know what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. Claire was manipulative, cruel, and constantly lied to me, twisting everything until I no longer trusted my own instincts. It wasn't just the affairs or the broken promises. It was the feeling of being a spectator in my own life. Like I was living someone else's story, one where I was always 2 steps behind, never fully engaged. I found a small town a few hours away from where we had lived. I didn't know anyone there, which was both a relief and a fear all on its own. The quiet felt like a weight on my chest, suffocating me, yet also strangely freeing. I needed time to breathe, to figure out who I was without the constant reminder of what I had been. The town, Maplewood, wasn't much to look at. A few old brick buildings, a couple of rundown diners, and a general store that still had a small-town charm to it. The streets were empty most days, save for the occasional car or the elderly couple that walked their dog by the park every morning. People smiled politely but didn't ask questions, and that was exactly what I wanted. I needed to be invisible. I moved into a small apartment above a bookstore. The owner, an old man named Mr. Green, barely spoke to me, but I liked that. The bookshelves were stacked with old novels, faded paperbacks, and dusty hardcovers, and they gave off the comforting smell of leather and paper. I'd walk through the aisles every evening, picking up books I didn't need but somehow still felt drawn to. It was a way to fill the silence without having to engage with anyone. In the beginning, I'd lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, trying to silence the endless thoughts racing through my mind. What had I done? What was I going to do now? I was 32, and I had no idea who I was anymore. I felt empty, like the pieces of my life no longer fit together. The fear of being alone haunted me, but it was nothing compared to the dread of returning to the life I had left behind. I wasn't sure which one was worse, the silence of solitude or the noise of a life I could never fully escape. One day, I was walking through the small town square when I saw her. Lily. She was sitting at a coffee shop, her curly brown hair tied loosely behind her head. She was reading a book, but every few seconds, her eyes would drift toward the window, as though she was waiting for something or someone. There was something about her, something familiar, yet completely different from the women I had known before. She didn't look like the type to play games or pretend to be something she wasn't. I told myself not to stare, not to get caught up in the past, but I couldn't help it. Something about the way she held herself, the way she moved, made me feel as though I had known her forever. As if our paths were meant to cross, even if I wasn't sure where it would lead. I walked past the shop, pretending not to notice her, but I felt a pull. The way her eyes lingered on me for just a second too long made my heart beat a little faster. It was the same feeling I had when I first met Claire, except this time, I was more aware of it. I wasn't going to let myself get wrapped up in another illusion. But Lily was different. I could feel it. There was a quiet strength in her that intrigued me, something that made me want to know more. I kept walking, telling myself I was overthinking everything. After all, I had just come to town to escape. I wasn't looking for anything. But the next day, as I was walking past the bookstore, I saw her again. This time, she was standing outside, looking at the old, worn books that lined the window. She had a coffee cup in her hand, and she looked at me with a smile that felt too genuine. "Is it weird to say that I think I've seen you before?" she asked, her voice soft but confident. I froze for a moment, not sure how to answer. She had seen me before? That couldn't be possible. I didn't know anyone here. "I don't think so," I said, forcing a smile. "I just moved here a few days ago." Her smile didn't fade. "Well, then I guess it's fate, because I swear I've seen you somewhere." She paused for a moment, taking a sip of her coffee before adding, "My name's Lily." I hesitated for a moment before extending my hand. "Nathan." She shook it lightly. There was something about her that made me feel uneasy, like I couldn't quite figure out what she wanted, but I was too intrigued to walk away. "Do you come here often?" she asked, nodding toward the bookstore. Yeah, I'm here almost every day, I said, glancing back toward the door. It's quiet. I like it. Sounds like the perfect place to hide away, she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. I don't blame you. I do the same thing. I come here when I need to get away from everything. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I felt like she understood me in a way I wasn't used to. Most people, even Claire, never seemed to notice when something was wrong. But Lily, she saw it immediately. There was no judgment in her eyes, just understanding. I told myself I wasn't ready for this. I wasn't ready to open up, to let someone back into my life. But at that moment, I also felt something else, something I hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The next few days passed in a blur. I didn't expect Lily to reach out again, but there she was, sitting at the same spot outside the bookstore the very next morning, looking as if nothing had changed. I had only meant to pass by, but my feet seemed to move on their own as I walked toward her. Hi, Nathan, she said, her voice light, but with an underlying warmth that felt oddly familiar. I wasn't sure if you'd show up again, but I'm glad you did. I didn't know what to say at first. I wasn't used to this. People didn't just show up and make you feel like you belonged without any strings attached. But there was something easy about Lily, something that made it easy to slip into conversation, even though I wasn't sure where it would lead. Yeah, I cleared my throat. I come by here a lot. Seems like the perfect place to clear my head. She raised an eyebrow, her gaze sharp but kind. You don't have to tell me that. I get it. Sometimes, it feels like we're just waiting for something to happen, but we're never quite sure what. I felt a small pang of discomfort in my chest, as though she had seen right through me, but instead of retreating, I stayed. I wasn't ready to walk away just yet. Lily motioned toward the chair across from her. Have a seat, if you want. I don't bite, I promise. I hesitated for a second, then took the seat. There was something magnetic about her, something that made me feel like I didn't need to try so hard. It felt like talking to someone I had known for years, even though we had only met once. There was no pretense, no forced small talk, just a conversation between two people who understood what it meant to be lost. So, she said, taking a sip of her coffee, what made you come to Maplewood? You didn't strike me as the small-town type. I shrugged, trying to hide how much the question affected me. I guess I just needed a change. A new start, or something. I wasn't happy where I was before, so I figured, why not try somewhere different? She studied me for a moment, then nodded slowly. I get that. I did the same thing a few years ago. Left the city. It was like I couldn't breathe there anymore, like everything was too loud, too fast. Here, it's quiet. People are different. Different how? I asked, intrigued by her tone. She laughed softly, looking down at her coffee cup as if trying to find the right words. It's hard to explain, but people in places like this don't ask too many questions. They don't care where you've been or what you're running from. They just let you be. That's why I like it. I let her words settle in my mind, feeling the weight of her understanding. Maybe that's what I needed. People who didn't expect me to be someone I wasn't. I had spent so long pretending, hiding behind walls, that I had almost forgotten what it felt like to just be myself. Lily smiled, sensing the shift in the conversation. It's not about escaping, though. It's about figuring out who you are when you don't have all the noise around you. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. She was right, but it was more than just figuring things out. It was about finding a version of myself that hadn't been crushed under the weight of someone else's expectations. It was about reclaiming pieces of myself I had lost over the years. We talked for hours. She told me about her move to Maplewood, how she had been living in a noisy city before, surrounded by people who barely noticed her, how she had found herself feeling suffocated by the constant rush of everything. She wasn't running from anything, but she was searching for something, a place where she could breathe. I found myself listening to her more than I had ever listened to anyone. There was a calmness in her voice, an honesty that made it easy to forget all the doubts that lingered in my mind. It wasn't about finding answers, she said. It was about giving yourself permission to be quiet, to stop pretending, and to just live. When we finally parted ways, It felt like I had known her for much longer than a few hours. I didn't know where this was going, but it didn't matter. I wasn't looking for anything right now. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could simply exist without the constant pressure to fix everything. The next few days were strange. I started running into Lily more often, but each time it felt less like a coincidence. She was always at the coffee shop, always walking around the town square, always just there. It was like the universe was trying to tell me something, but I wasn't sure what. We didn't speak as much during those encounters, but there was always a smile, always a wave, as if we were silently acknowledging the strange bond that had formed between us. One evening, about a week after we had first met, I found myself walking past the coffee shop again. It was getting late, and the streetlights cast a soft glow on the sidewalks. I wasn't planning on stopping, but when I saw Lily sitting by the window, her book in her lap, I couldn't resist. I walked inside, and she looked up as soon as the doors swung open, her face lighting up with recognition. There was no need for words. She just motioned for me to join her. "You're not going to sit there all night, are you?" she teased as I took a seat. I smirked, shaking my head. I wasn't planning to. The conversation flowed easily again, like it always did with her. But this time, something felt different. It wasn't just small talk or idle chatter. There was a subtle undercurrent of something deeper, something unspoken but understood between us. It wasn't romantic yet, but there was a quiet connection that I couldn't ignore. As the evening wore on, I realized how much I had missed feeling this way, how much I had missed simply talking to someone without the fear of judgment or pretense. There were no walls between us. It was just two people, two souls who had found each other by chance, sharing their thoughts and moments in a quiet town that neither of us had expected to end up in. "I'm glad I met you, Nathan," she said, her voice softer now. I met her gaze and felt the same warmth I had the first time we spoke. "I'm glad too." In that moment, I wasn't sure where this would go, or what would come of it. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't need to know. For once, I was content just to be here, to let things unfold as they would. I didn't see Lily the next day, or the day after. It was strange, like the universe had pulled her from the world I'd started to settle into, just when I was getting used to her presence. For a few days, the routine of walking through Maplewood felt like it had lost its spark. The mornings weren't quite as easy, the streets seemed a little quieter, and even the little bookstore felt emptier. I tried not to dwell on it. She was probably just busy with her own life, and maybe I had read too much into everything. Maybe I was just looking for something in her that didn't exist. It wasn't like we had a deep connection, right? We barely knew each other. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It was like I had caught a glimpse of something real, something raw, and now it was just gone. Then, for days later, as I was walking through the square near the park, I saw her again. She was sitting on the bench under the old oak tree, her back to me. The familiar sight of her silhouette caught me off guard. My heart gave a strange jolt, like a breath I'd been holding finally escaping my lungs. I didn't think, I just walked over. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, but the words felt heavier than I expected. She looked up, a smile slowly spreading across her face. "Nathan," she greeted, almost like she had been waiting for me. I paused, unsure of how to handle the sudden rush of emotions that hit me. She seemed so effortless in her smile, like nothing had changed. But in me, everything had. "Been a while," I said, settling down beside her without asking. Lily glanced at me, her eyes searching, as if she knew exactly what I was thinking, what had been going on in my head these last few days. "Yeah, I've been caught up with some stuff. You know how it is," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. She looked like she hadn't missed a beat, like this had all been part of her plan, whatever it was. I nodded. "Yeah, I get it." She shifted a little on the bench, crossing her legs and tucking her hands into her lap. "I wanted to ask you something." I raised an eyebrow. "What's up?" Her expression shifted then, like she was choosing her words carefully. "I've been thinking. You said you moved here to start fresh, right? So, what does that mean for you? What's the plan, Nathan? What are you really running from?" Her question hit me harder than I expected. I wanted to be honest, to tell her everything, but something stopped me. I wasn't sure if I could even explain what I was running from. It wasn't one thing. It was a combination of every mistake I had made, every bad decision, every failed relationship. It was me, and I didn't know how to say that. Instead, I laughed lightly, trying to brush it off. I don't know. I guess I just needed space. A clean slate. Lily didn't buy it. She gave me a knowing look, and I could tell she wasn't going to let me off that easy. Nathan, it's not that simple. Running away doesn't fix things. It just makes them harder to face later on. I felt my chest tighten at her words. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had been hiding from something deeper, something I couldn't quite put into words. I didn't know how to face it, though, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. We sat there in silence for a while, the weight of the conversation hanging between us like a cloud. The sun was starting to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the park. There was something strangely comforting about the quiet, though. Something about being here with her, even in the silence, made me feel less alone. Finally, she broke the silence. You know, she said softly, I used to think running away was the answer too. But the more I tried to escape, the more I realized I couldn't run from myself. Wherever I went, I took all the baggage with me. You can't outrun your past forever. I looked over at her, studying her face. There was something raw in her eyes, like she had been through battles of her own, battles that hadn't left her unscathed. Maybe that was what I was drawn to. Not her ability to hide her pain, but the way she wore it, how she had learned to live with it. There was a kind of strength in that I didn't fully understand yet, but I wanted to. I get it, I said quietly, but it's not easy to stop running, you know? Lily smiled, a small but knowing smile. No, it's not easy, but sometimes you have to make the decision to stop running. Otherwise, you'll spend your whole life going in circles. I wanted to say something in return, but the words wouldn't come. I felt exposed somehow, like she had peeled back a layer of me that I wasn't ready to face. And yet, somehow, it felt okay. Like for the first time, I wasn't being asked to pretend or hide. I've been thinking about what you said, about being honest with myself, I admitted, feeling vulnerable in a way I wasn't used to. I don't know how to do that yet, but I guess I'm trying. She nodded, her gaze softening. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. Just try to be kind to yourself. You're here. That's the first step. Don't rush it. Her words stayed with me long after our conversation ended. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't in a hurry to solve everything. Maybe it wasn't about rushing towards some destination. Maybe it was about letting things unfold, one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, Lily and I grew closer in a way that felt natural. We didn't force anything. We spent afternoons at the bookstore, walking through the park, or just sitting together in silence. There was no pressure, no expectations. Just two people who had found something real, something grounded, and weren't afraid to let it grow in its own time. But even as our friendship blossomed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lily was holding something back. There were moments when her eyes would cloud over, when her smile would falter, but she'd always bounce back quickly, like nothing had happened. I didn't know what it was, but I was beginning to wonder if she was running too. And if she was, would she ever stop? Or would she keep moving through life, never letting anyone close enough to see the real her? As much as I didn't want to admit it, I found myself hoping that one day, she would let me in. That one day, she would let me help carry whatever burden she was still holding on to. But for now, I was content. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, surrounded by someone who understood the silence and the noise inside me. And maybe that was all I needed, at least for a while. The days continued to pass, each one blending into the next with a sense of quiet anticipation. It was as if life in Maplewood had adopted a slower rhythm, one that allowed me to catch my breath, to exist in a way I hadn't for a long time. And in that stillness, Lily and I began to carve out a space for each other, a place where we could both be our true selves without the pressure of expectations or pretense. There were mornings when we met at the cafe down the street, sitting by the window with our coffee, watching the world move by. We didn't talk much, and that was fine. Sometimes, the comfort of silence between us was all that was needed. Other times, she would share little fragments of her life, small stories from her childhood, moments of joy and pain that had shaped her into the person she was. But she never went too deep. There were always parts of her that she kept locked away, hidden beneath layers of carefully curated smiles and quiet laughter. I didn't press her. I understood what it meant to carry things you didn't know how to share, and I respected her boundaries. But there were moments, like when she looked out the window with that faraway look in her eyes, or when she laughed a little too loudly at something that wasn't really funny, that made me wonder what she was really thinking, what she wasn't saying. Sometimes I wished I could dive into her world and pull out the things she kept buried, the things that made her hesitate and pull back when she got too close. But I knew better than to force it. She would share when she was ready. One evening, as we walked along the cobbled streets of Maplewood, I noticed the subtle change in her demeanor. She had been quiet for most of the walk, lost in thought. I had gotten used to the quiet, but tonight, something felt different, more distant, like she was pulling away. "You okay?" I asked, the words slipping out before I could stop them. She stopped walking and looked at me, her eyes serious. "I'm fine," she said, her voice a little too controlled. I knew that tone. It was the one she used when she didn't want to talk about something, when she was shutting down a conversation before it could even start. "You sure?" I pressed gently. "You seem a little off." She took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, as if gathering her thoughts. "It's not you, Nathan. It's me," she said, her voice softer now. "I've been thinking a lot lately. About everything." I waited, my heart picking up pace. I wasn't sure where this was going, but I felt the pull of something important about to unfold. "What about everything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She turned her gaze to the ground for a moment, her eyes tracing the uneven stones beneath our feet. "I've been running too, you know?" Her voice cracked slightly, and for a brief moment, I saw the vulnerability she usually kept hidden. Not just from the past, but from the future. From everything that could happen next. It's easier to stay here, in this space where nothing has to change. I felt a tightness in my chest. There was so much more behind her words, more than she was letting on, but I didn't want to push her too far. I wanted to understand, but I also wanted to respect her. "You don't have to run, Lily," I said quietly, taking a step closer. "You don't have to do this alone." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something. A kind of rawness that I couldn't quite place. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how to let go of all the things that are holding me back, and I don't know if I'm ready to trust someone else with all of it." I wanted to reach out, to tell her that I was here for her, that she didn't have to carry the weight of everything on her own. But I also knew that trust couldn't be forced. It had to be given freely, in its own time. "I'm not going anywhere," I said, my voice firm but gentle. "Whenever you're ready, I'll be here. You don't have to do this alone." She nodded slowly, a single tear slipping down her cheek before she quickly wiped it away. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. We stood there for a long moment, neither of us speaking, just feeling the quiet between us. The city around us seemed to fade away, and in that silence, I realized something. I wasn't just offering her my presence. I was offering her patience. I didn't need her to open up all at once. I didn't need her to reveal everything. I just needed her to know that, no matter what, I wouldn't push her away. The next few days were filled with small moments, shared smiles, and quiet conversations. Nothing monumental happened, but something shifted. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Lily began to open up, piece by piece. She told me about her childhood, her family, and some of the painful memories that had shaped her. It wasn't easy for her, I could see that, but she was trying. And that, to me, was enough. One afternoon, we found ourselves sitting by the lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The water shimmered in the fading light, and the sound of the breeze rustling through the trees was the only noise between us. It felt like the world had paused, just for a moment, and all that mattered was the space we shared. "I used to think I had to fix everything," Lily said, breaking the silence. "That I had to have all the answers, all the solutions. But I don't, and I don't think anyone does." I looked at her, unsure of what she meant, but something in her voice told me she was talking about more than just her personal struggles. "What do you mean?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. She shrugged, her gaze fixed on the water. I think we spend so much time trying to fix ourselves, trying to fix everything around us, that we forget to just live, to accept the broken pieces and move forward anyway. It's not about being perfect. It's about finding peace, even when things are messy. I let her words sink in, feeling the weight of them settle in my chest. It was like she had just put into words everything I had been struggling with, all the broken pieces I had tried to hide, all the parts of myself I had tried to fix. Maybe she was right. Maybe the key wasn't fixing everything, but accepting the mess, the imperfections, and learning to live with them. I turned to her, a soft smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. I think I'm starting to get it, I said. She smiled back, her eyes bright with a kind of quiet understanding. It's a process, she said, her voice calm. But we're all in it together, one step at a time. And for the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. It wasn't that everything was perfect or that all my questions had been answered, but in that moment, I realized that maybe the answer wasn't about knowing everything. Maybe it was about being okay with not knowing, and just letting life unfold as it was meant to. I didn't need to have everything figured out, and I didn't need Lily to have all the answers either. We were both in this together, and that was enough. For now, it was enough. The next few weeks felt like a quiet unraveling of the lives we had built before we met. Lily and I spent a lot of time together, but it wasn't about the big gestures or the deep conversations. It was in the small moments, the quiet walks, the shared meals, the way her fingers would brush mine when she thought I wasn't paying attention. Those moments added up, layer by layer, until it became clear that something was shifting between us, something unspoken but undeniable. It wasn't perfect, of course. There were days when the weight of everything we hadn't said still hung in the air, thick and unyielding. But we were trying, and that effort was enough. Slowly, Lily began to trust me in ways I hadn't expected. She shared more of her fears, her hopes, her scars, and, for the first time in a long while, I saw a glimpse of the person she was before life had hardened her. I could see her, really see her, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a person who had been carrying more than her fair share of pain for far too long. One evening, we were sitting on the porch of the house she had rented, a small, charming cottage at the edge of town. The sun was setting, casting a soft glow over the horizon, and the air was cool with the promise of autumn. Lily had her knees pulled up to her chest, a mug of tea resting in her hands. I watched her, lost in thought, the silence between us as comfortable as the fading light. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" she asked out of nowhere, her voice barely above a whisper. The question caught me off guard, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. It wasn't a question about us, exactly, but something larger. The future. The unknown. It was like she was asking whether we could ever move beyond the weight of our pasts, whether we could truly step into a future that wasn't shaped by everything we had left behind. "I do," I said, my voice steady but soft. "But I don't know what it looks like." I think that's the thing. The future is always a little blurry, no matter how much we try to define it. But I think we just have to keep moving forward, one step at a time, and trust that it will make sense eventually. She looked at me then, her eyes searching mine, and for a brief moment, I saw the doubt there. The same doubt that had been there when we first met, the same fear of what would happen if we let ourselves go too far, if we let ourselves care too much. But there was something else there too, something I hadn't seen before, a flicker of hope. "You think it will?" she asked, almost hesitantly, as if she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "I think it has to," I said, my heart pounding just a little faster than usual. "We can't live in the past forever, Lily. We have to let go at some point. And maybe that's the hardest part. But it's also the only way forward." She nodded slowly, her gaze drifting back to the horizon. The wind had picked up, rustling the leaves of the trees nearby, and I felt the weight of her silence settle between us. I wasn't sure if she believed me, or if she was just trying to convince herself. But for the first time, I felt like we were moving towards something, not away from it. Whatever came next, I knew we would face it together. The next few days were a blur of normalcy, quiet dinners, long walks, and the occasional heart-to-heart where we both dipped our toes into the deeper waters of our fears and hopes. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when we would each pull back, retreating into our own shells for a little while. But something had changed between us, and I could feel it in every touch, every glance, every shared moment of vulnerability. But even as things seemed to fall into place, I knew we weren't out of the woods yet. There were still things left unsaid, unresolved. And, as much as I wanted to believe that everything was fine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming, something I couldn't control. It was a late afternoon when the storm hit. We had just finished dinner, and Lily was in the kitchen cleaning up while I sat at the table, staring out the window. The sky had darkened, and I could hear the distant rumble of thunder. It wasn't unusual for storms to roll in this time of year, but this one felt different, like it had a weight to it, a sense of impending chaos. Lily came into the room, her hands still damp from the dishes. She was about to say something when she froze, her gaze fixed on something outside the window. "What is it?" I asked, my voice tentative. She didn't answer at first, her face pale. It took me a moment to realize that she wasn't looking at the storm. She was looking at something else, something much closer. And then I saw it too, a figure standing in the driveway, just beyond the reach of the porch light. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel a knot forming in my stomach as the figure stepped forward into the light, revealing a familiar face. My stomach turned over. It was Ethan. I didn't even have to ask what he was doing here. I knew. He had tracked her down. He had finally found her. Lily's breath caught in her throat, and I watched her tense up, her body going rigid as if she was preparing to run. She didn't need to say anything. I could see the fear in her eyes, the history that was written on her face in every tense line of her expression. "Lily," I started, my voice low, unsure of what to do, but I couldn't finish my thought. She was already moving toward the door. "Stay here," she said quietly, her voice tight with emotion. "I'll handle this." I didn't know what to say, didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to stop her, to tell her that she didn't have to face this alone. But I knew, deep down, that this was something she had to face on her own. She had to face him, just as much as she had to face everything she had been running from. "Lily, wait," I called, my voice desperate. "Please, let me help." But she was already opening the door, stepping out into the night, her back straight, her face set in a mask of determination that I had never seen before. I watched her walk toward Ethan, feeling a surge of helplessness wash over me. And then I realized something. No matter what happened, no matter how this played out, we couldn't keep running. Neither of us could. I stood frozen in the doorway, my heart pounding in my chest as I watched Lily walk toward Ethan. Every step she took seemed to echo in my mind. I wanted to call out to her again, to stop her, but I knew it wasn't my place. This was her fight now. I could only hope she was ready to face it. The wind had picked up, whipping around them both as they stood in the middle of the driveway. A standoff that felt heavier than any storm that could roll in from the horizon. I could barely hear their conversation, the words lost to the wind, but I could see the tense body language, the way Lily's back was rigid, the way Ethan's hands were moving as if he was trying to explain something. She was listening, her face hard and unreadable. Whatever history they had, it was all coming to a head right now. The air between them was thick with the weight of years of unresolved issues, and as much as I wanted to walk out there, as much as I wanted to grab her and tell her that everything would be okay, I couldn't. This was something she had to do on her own. If she didn't face him now, there was no moving forward. She would keep looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. A few minutes passed, but it felt like hours. And then, unexpectedly, I saw it. The shift in her posture, the tightness in her shoulders loosened, and the mask she had been wearing seemed to crack. She wasn't just standing there anymore. She was talking back. Her hands were gesturing now, her voice rising above the wind, her words clear and firm. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but the confidence in her stance told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't scared anymore. This wasn't the broken woman who had run away from him all those years ago. This was Lily, fully in control, finally standing up for herself. It didn't take long after that for the confrontation to escalate. Ethan's movements grew more aggressive, and I could see his face turning red with frustration. He was talking faster now, his hands throwing up in the air as if trying to plead his case, but Lily didn't flinch. She wasn't giving him anything. I could tell she had made up her mind. It was at that moment, when I thought everything was about to explode, that Ethan made a move toward her, stepping forward like he was going to grab her or force her into submission. But Lily didn't back down. She stepped back and, for a brief second, I saw her glance toward the house, toward me. That look was all I needed. I couldn't stand by any longer. I was out the door in an instant, the urgency in my legs pushing me forward. "Lily," I called, my voice louder than I intended, cutting through the tension in the air. Ethan turned at the sound of my voice, a flash of surprise crossing his face before it quickly turned into something darker. Lily's eyes met mine, a brief flicker of relief before she closed herself off again. She didn't need me to step in. This was still her fight. But she had given me a signal, whether she realized it or not. She was no longer alone in this. We were in it together. Ethan's gaze shifted from Lily to me, and then back again. For a moment, he just stood there, sizing me up like I was some kind of threat, but the look on his face was more than that. It was the look of someone who realized he had lost control, that the game had changed, and he wasn't going to be the one calling the shots anymore. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan growled, his tone low and dangerous. I didn't flinch. "I'm the one who's not going to let you hurt her anymore," I said, my voice calm, but firm. Ethan stepped closer, his fists clenching at his sides. The tension in the air thickened. I could feel it in my bones. The storm had arrived, not outside, but right here, between us. It would end one way or another, and I wasn't going to back down. "Get out of here before things get ugly," Ethan warned, his eyes narrowing as he stared me down. But Lily didn't back down either. She stepped between us, her eyes cold, her voice steady as she spoke to him directly. "You don't get to control me anymore, Ethan. Not with your threats, not with your lies. I'm done." Her words hit like a punch to the gut, and I could see Ethan's anger boil over. He lunged at her, but Lily wasn't having it. She stepped to the side, expertly dodging his grab and putting herself out of his reach. It was like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. "I said, I'm done," she shouted, her voice raw with years of pent-up emotion. Ethan's face twisted in fury, and for a split second, I thought he might strike her, but before he could make a move, I was there. I shoved him back, hard, enough to put distance between us. My heart was racing, but I couldn't let him get to her. "Not now. What the hell's wrong with you?" I demanded, my chest heaving from adrenaline. "You can't just show up here and think you can intimidate her." He stumbled back, a mix of shock and disbelief flashing across his face. For a moment, I thought he might come at me next, but he didn't. He took a long look at Lily, his eyes filled with a strange mix of regret and rage. And then, without another word, he turned and walked away, his footsteps heavy and purposeful. Lily didn't move, didn't say anything for a long moment. She just stood there, breathing heavily, her hands clenched at her sides. I could tell she was trying to steady herself, trying to come to terms with what had just happened. But she was standing, not running. I took a few cautious steps toward her. "Lily," I said softly, my voice gentle, but with an edge of concern. She didn't look at me immediately. Instead, she just took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. "I'm okay," she said quietly, but there was something in her voice, something that told me she wasn't entirely sure that this wasn't over for her. "But I'm not running anymore," she added, her words firm, final. I didn't say anything right away. There was nothing to say. We had just lived through something that changed everything between us. She wasn't the same woman who had walked out of that house weeks ago. Neither of us were. But we were still standing, together. That was enough, for now. The storm passed, leaving nothing but the echoes of its aftermath. And as we stood there in the aftermath of that night, I realized something. The hardest part wasn't over, but we had taken the first step, together.